Dunwich Borers does not announce itself as a place of horror. At first glance, it looks like another exhausted industrial scar left behind by the old world, a quarry hollowed out in the pursuit of stone and profit, then abandoned when the bombs rendered both meaningless. Rusted machinery sits frozen mid-task, scaffolding creaks in the wind. The earth itself appears wounded, carved open, and left to decay. Nothing about the surface suggests the kind of place that bends memory, fractures time, or makes the ground feel as though it is watching. The deeper one travels into the quarry, the more that first impression begins to unravel. The air changes subtly, becoming heavier without growing stale. Sounds carry in ways they should not, footsteps echoing twice, sometimes 3 times, as if the walls are responding rather than reflecting. The deeper corridors are damp, not with water alone, but with a sense of age that feels older than the quarry itself. These tunnels were not merely dug into the earth, they feel as though they intruded upon something that was already there. Dunwich Borers was operated by the Dunwich Company, a name that appears repeatedly across the wasteland in places no one quite feels comfortable staying too long. Pre-war records describe Dunwich as a logistics and excavation firm, a company specializing in shipping, quarrying, and large-scale ground operations. On paper, it was mundane, but the paper record does not match what the company left behind. Wherever Dunwich operated, workers complained of headaches, vivid dreams, and voices heard in places where no one else stood. At Dunwich Borers, those complaints escalated. Terminal entries recovered from the site describe workers losing track of time during shifts. Some reported entire hours vanishing from memory, only to find themselves deeper in the quarry than they remembered traveling. Others wrote about hearing chanting that seemed to come from below the stone, not echoing through tunnels, but vibrating upward through their feet. Supervisors dismissed these concerns as stress reactions or attempts to avoid work. Production continued regardless. As excavation pushed deeper, the quarry began cutting through stone that did not match geological surveys. Workers noted layers of rock that appeared unnaturally smooth, almost shaped rather than fractured. Some sections showed markings that resembled erosion, but followed deliberate patterns, repeating in ways that suggested design. No official explanation was ever logged. The material was simply removed and shipped out, its destination never recorded. Then the hallucinations began. Employees started seeing figures that did not belong in the quarry. Shadowy silhouettes would appear at the edge of vision, vanishing when approached. Others reported flashes of people in outdated clothing standing silently along the walkways. These were not described as ghosts or monsters, but as workers' men wearing older uniforms, carrying tools no longer in use. The visions did not feel threatening, they felt observant. What makes Dunwich Borers especially disturbing is that these hallucinations were not random. Different individuals reported seeing the same scenes in the same locations. A man falling from a platform, a supervisor standing above a pit, arms crossed, watching. A ritual-like gathering near the lowest excavation site, lit by torches instead of work lamps. These visions were synchronized, replaying themselves as though embedded in the stone. As the quarry neared its deepest point, something shifted within the workforce. Logs mention increased aggression among some employees and complete withdrawal among others. Arguments turned violent. One worker attacked a colleague with a mining tool, later claiming he believed the man was already dead. Another walked willingly into a cave-in zone and did not attempt to escape. His body was never recovered. After these incidents, security was increased, but the company did not shut the site down. Instead, excavation accelerated. The final descent into Dunwich Borers leads to a chamber that no longer resembles a quarry. The stone walls become irregular, almost organic, curving inward in ways that feel intentional. The ground slopes gently downward, as though guiding rather than collapsing. Work lights are sparse here, and the darkness presses closer than it does elsewhere in the quarry. This is where the voices grow louder. Those who reach this depth report a sensation that is difficult to articulate. It is not fear in the conventional sense. There is no immediate threat, no clear danger. Instead, there is a feeling of recognition, as if something below has been waiting patiently and is pleased to be acknowledged again. The air vibrates faintly, not audibly, but physically, like the hum of distant machinery that cannot be located. At the bottom of Dunwich Borers lies an object that should not exist in a modern industrial site. A massive stone structure, partially submerged in water, rests at the lowest point of the quarry. It is not a machine. It does not match any known architecture. Its surface is carved with symbols that do not correspond to any language found elsewhere in the Fallout world. The stone is ancient, eroded not by decades or centuries, but by something far older. This structure was not brought here. It was uncovered. Standing near it triggers visions more intense than anywhere else in the quarry. Time fractures. The present dissolves into overlapping moments. Observers see the quarry as it once was, bustling with workers, then flicker forward to moments after the bombs, then further back to scenes that do not align with recorded history at all. In these visions, the stone structure is surrounded by robed figures, chanting in a language that no terminal ever translates. The sound is not threatening, it is reverent. The implication is subtle but profound. Dunwich Borers did not discover something new. It disturbed something old. The Dunwich Company appears to have been aware of this long before the bombs fell. Internal correspondence suggests that upper management knew excavation was uncovering more than stone. Rather than halting operations, they treated the phenomenon as a research opportunity. Workers became unwilling participants in an experiment not designed to observe productivity, but exposure. How long could a human mind remain intact near the object? What symptoms appeared first? How did belief, fear, and suggestion interact with whatever influence radiated from below? No formal conclusions are recorded. The war interrupted the project before results could be consolidated, but the quarry remains, and the influence did not fade with the passing of time. Even centuries later, the hallucinations persist. Travelers report seeing flashes of pre-war life while descending into the quarry. Some experience sudden memories that do not belong to them, brief images of ceremonies, of hands pressed against stone, of voices speaking in unison. Others feel compelled to continue downward, even when every instinct warns against it. The quarry does not lure with promises. It does not threaten. It simply waits. The most unsettling aspect of Dunwich Borers is that nothing there appears actively hostile. There are no traps designed to kill intruders, no defenses triggered by movement, no automated systems enforcing control. The danger comes not from violence, but from erosion of memory, of certainty, of self. The deeper one goes, the harder it becomes to distinguish personal thoughts from implanted impressions. The quarry does not force obedience. It invites surrender. Some theorize that the stone structure beneath Dunwich Borers is tied to the same unknown force referenced in other Dunwich locations across the wasteland. These sites share common traits: auditory hallucinations, temporal distortions, and artifacts that predate known civilizations. If true, Dunwich Borers is not an isolated anomaly, but part of a larger pattern, one that suggests the Earth itself remembers something humanity was never meant to uncover. Others argue for a psychological explanation. They claim the quarry's effects are the result of extreme environmental stress combined with suggestion and corporate secrecy. In this view, The rituals and visions are products of human belief layered onto an industrial disaster site. But this explanation falters when confronted with the consistency of experiences across generations, long after the original workers died and their stories were forgotten. The stone does not decay, the influence does not weaken. Dunwich Borers exists as it always has, silent, patient, and indifferent. It does not chase those who leave. It does not punish those who turn back. But it also does not forget those who descend too far. Some explorers leave the quarry changed in ways they cannot articulate, plagued by dreams of stone corridors and distant chanting that follow them far from the site. Others never leave at all, their final footsteps disappearing into darkness that never gives them back. In the end, Dunwich Borers represents a kind of horror rare even in the wasteland. It is not the horror of violence or decay, but of revelation. The suggestion that beneath the ruins of civilization lie older truths that survived the end of the world without noticing it had happened. That humanity did not create the most dangerous things it encountered, it merely uncovered them. The quarry remains open. The stone remains buried and exposed at the same time, and whatever watches from below does not need to act. It already has all the time in the world. Unlike many other vaults whose true purposes were hidden behind optimistic brochures and smiling Vault Tech mascots, Vault 106's experiment was quietly cruel from the beginning. Its doors sealed not to protect its residents from the world outside, but to trap them inside an environment that would steadily dismantle their minds. Long before the bombs fell, engineers designed its air filtration system to release psychoactive compounds directly into the vault's circulation. These chemicals were subtle at first, almost harmless in isolation. Over time, however, they accumulated, altering perception, memory, and emotional stability in ways no one inside could fully understand. The residents of Vault 106 entered believing they were safe. Initial logs describe ordinary routines, settling into quarters, assigning work rotations, organizing food distribution, and establishing governance. Children attended classes. Adults worked maintenance shifts. The vault functioned exactly as Vault Tech advertised: clean, orderly, and structured. There was no immediate indication that the air they breathed was slowly reshaping their thoughts. That was the experiment's elegance. Nothing was sudden, nothing was obvious. The first symptoms were mild. Residents reported headaches that came and went without pattern. Some described vivid dreams that felt unusually real, lingering long after waking. Others mentioned feeling watched, though security logs showed no irregularities. Vault medical staff initially dismissed these complaints as stress responses to confinement. After all, this was life underground. People needed time to adjust. Vault Tech's own internal documentation encouraged overseers to avoid alarming explanations and continue monitoring behavior quietly. As weeks turned into months, the hallucinations intensified. Residents began seeing things that did not exist: shadows moving where lights were steady, reflections in polished metal that lagged behind real movement, faces appearing briefly in corners of rooms before vanishing. These were not shared experiences at first. Each individual saw something different. One person described hearing footsteps behind them in empty corridors. Another claimed to hear a child laughing in ventilation shafts late at night. The randomness made the phenomena easier to ignore and harder to confront, but soon the randomness disappeared. Groups of residents started reporting similar visions in the same locations. Entire corridors became associated with whispers. Certain rooms triggered nausea, panic, or sudden emotional breakdowns. People began avoiding specific areas without knowing why. Maintenance teams reassigned routes instinctively, steering clear of places that felt wrong. The vault's layout itself became hostile, not through structural failure, but through psychological association. Communication deteriorated next. Conversations became disjointed. People misremembered things they had said only minutes earlier. Arguments erupted over events that never occurred. Vault leadership struggled to maintain authority as trust eroded. Residents accused one another of lying, spying, or hiding information. Paranoia spread not because of evidence, but because no one could trust their own perceptions enough to dismiss suspicion. Vault 106's overseer logs grow erratic during this period. Entries contradict one another. Dates repeat or skip entirely. The overseer refers to meetings that other terminals do not record. At times, the logs address non-existent staff members by name, issuing instructions to people who were never assigned roles. At other moments, the overseer expresses concern that the vault is being observed from within, a phrase that appears multiple times without explanation. Medical staff attempted interventions. Sedatives were administered. Counseling sessions were scheduled. Isolation protocols were tested. None of it worked. The chemicals in the air were not causing a single, identifiable disorder. They were fracturing cognition in unpredictable ways, disrupting the boundary between imagination and reality. No treatment could reverse that without removing the cause, and the cause was the vault itself. Violence followed naturally. When perception collapses, intent becomes impossible to judge. Residents attacked one another, believing they were acting in self-defense. Security responded forcefully, escalating conflicts rather than containing them. Some individuals barricaded themselves in quarters, convinced the rest of the vault had already turned hostile. Others roamed corridors aimlessly, muttering to voices only they could hear. The social contract that kept the vault functioning dissolved quietly, replaced by fear and isolation. One of the most disturbing aspects of Vault 106 is the lack of a clear ending. Unlike vaults destroyed by catastrophic failures or mass executions, Vault 106 simply fades. Records stop abruptly. There is no final entry describing evacuation, rebellion, or collapse. The implication is not that everyone died at once, but that order eroded until documentation became meaningless. People continued living, fighting, hiding, and hallucinating until the vault ceased to be a community and became something else entirely. Centuries later, the air is still poisoned. The psychoactive compounds never dissipated. Automated systems continue circulating them faithfully, obeying instructions issued long before anyone alive remembered why. Visitors entering Vault 106 experience the same effects as its original inhabitants. Hallucinations begin almost immediately. The vault manipulates perception so convincingly that even experienced wastelanders struggle to distinguish threats from illusions. Enemies appear where none exist. Walls seem to breathe. Voices call out familiar names. What makes Vault 106 particularly cruel is that it does not kill directly. There are no lethal traps designed to cull intruders. No gas chambers meant to execute en masse. The danger comes from the mind turning against itself. Travelers fire at shadows until ammunition runs dry. They flee from imaginary threats into real ones. Some wander deeper into the vault, convinced they are being led to safety. Others collapse in panic, unable to trust their senses long enough to escape. Occasionally, survivors claim to encounter figures who appear coherent residents who somehow adapted to the environment rather than breaking beneath it. These individuals are often described as calm, detached, and unsettlingly composed. They speak slowly, choosing words carefully, as if aware that reality itself is unstable. Whether these figures are real survivors, hallucinations, or something in between remains unclear. The vault blurs that distinction deliberately. The true horror of Vault 106 lies in its intent. This was not an experiment about survival. It was not designed to test resilience or adaptability. It was meant to observe collapse. Vault-Tec wanted to know how long a population could function while reality itself eroded around them. How trust breaks down, how authority fails, how individuals behave when they cannot rely on their own senses. In that sense, Vault 106 succeeded perfectly. It demonstrated that society does not require physical destruction to fall apart. Remove certainty, and everything else follows. Law, morality, cooperation all depend on shared reality. When that foundation cracks, violence becomes inevitable, even among people who never intended harm. Vault 106 remains a sealed monument to that knowledge. Its corridors are filled not with corpses, but with echoes, fragments of conversations that never finished, arguments that never resolved, and lives that never ended cleanly. The vault does not tell a single story of catastrophe. It tells hundreds of small ones, layered on top of each other until no individual narrative survives. Even after leaving, the effects can linger. Some who escape report hearing faint whispers days later, uncertain whether they are memories or new hallucinations. Others experience vivid dreams set in corridors they swear they never visited. Vault 106 does not need to keep its victims inside forever. Once exposed, the damage has already been done. In the end, Vault 106 is terrifying, not because of what happened there, but because of what it proves. That reality is fragile. That control can be exerted without chains or weapons. That the most effective prison is not one that confines the body, but one that dissolves the mind's ability to trust itself. Vault 106 still breathes, and anyone who enters it breathes with it. The Sierra Madre Casino was never meant to be entered easily, and it was never meant to be left at all. Rising out of toxic clouds like a mirage that refuses to fade, it stands untouched by time, war, and decay in ways that feel deliberate rather than fortunate. Where most ruins crumble under centuries of neglect, the Sierra Madre remains pristine behind its sealed gates, as though the apocalypse simply passed it by. That preservation is not a miracle. It is the first warning. Before the Great War, the casino was conceived as a monument to control. Its creator did not believe in chance or chaos, only in systems refined enough to eliminate uncertainty. The Sierra Madre was designed to be a self-contained world, isolated from the failures of the outside. It would provide luxury without vulnerability, beauty without risk, and security without trust. Every inch of the structure reflects this obsession. Doors lock automatically, corridors funnel movement with quiet precision, surveillance systems watch without sleeping. Even the air itself is engineered to obey. When the bombs fell, the Sierra Madre did not open its doors to the world. It sealed itself tighter. Those trapped inside during the war found themselves in a place that could not forgive mistakes. Toxic clouds seeped through streets and hallways, not as a natural disaster, but as an extension of the casino's defensive systems. These clouds were not random radiation fallout. They were controlled, recycled, and directed, forming invisible walls that punished curiosity and forced movement along specific paths. Anyone who strayed from those paths paid for it slowly, their lungs filling with poison while the casino continued operating as if nothing were wrong. Security inside the Sierra Madre was never human. Holographic guards patrol endlessly, immune to fatigue, pain, and moral hesitation. They enforce rules written decades earlier, responding to threats no longer relevant while ignoring suffering that was never accounted for. To them, anyone without proper authorization is a problem to be corrected. They do not kill out of malice. They kill because that is what the system demands. The fact that their creators are long dead changes nothing. What makes the Sierra Madre uniquely disturbing is not simply its deadliness, but its persistence. Long after everyone who once worked or stayed there perished, the casino continued to function. Power flows, locks engage, broadcasts repeat. The Sierra Madre does not decay because it was never designed to rely on people. It was designed to outlast them. That broadcast is the most insidious element of all. The Sierra Madre signal drifts across the wasteland, promising untouched riches and safety sealed away from the chaos outside. It speaks in the language of hope, of reward for endurance, of a paradise preserved for those clever or desperate enough to find it. The message never changes, and that constancy gives it power. Over time, it becomes myth. Stories circulate of treasure beyond imagining, of technology unspoiled by time. The signal does not need to convince everyone. It only needs to convince enough. Those who follow the signal discover the truth too late. Entry into the Sierra Madre is not a triumph but a sentence. Collars lock around necks, monitoring behavior and enforcing obedience. Explosions await disobedience. Cooperation becomes mandatory, not because trust exists, but because survival demands it. The casino forces strangers into uneasy alliances, then quietly tests those alliances under pressure. Supplies are limited, information is withheld, escape routes are conditional. The structure does not merely observe human behavior under stress, it engineers it. The casino is designed around temptation. Every corridor leads towards something valuable, something just out of reach. Gold sits behind force fields. Technology hums behind locked doors. Even escape requires sacrifice. The Sierra Madre never allows anyone to have everything. Choices must be made, and those choices reveal priorities. Greed, loyalty, fear, and hope are all measured implicitly. The structure does not need scientists taking notes. Its architecture is the experiment. What happened to the original inhabitants remains fragmented and unclear. Terminal entries and environmental clues suggest that paranoia spread quickly once the casino sealed itself. Guests and staff turned on one another. Security systems misinterpreted panic as threat escalation. Attempts to seize control of the vault beneath the casino ended in disaster. The poison cloud crept into places it was never meant to reach, while automated defenses prevented escape. Those inside were not killed all at once. They were slowly worn down by isolation, mistrust, and the realization that the casino would never release them. And yet, even after that tragedy, the system did not shut down. The Sierra Madre continues to reset itself. Traps rearm. Holograms resume patrols. The broadcast continues uninterrupted. This raises a question that has no comforting answer. Who or what maintains it? One possibility is that the casino was programmed to operate indefinitely, obeying instructions without regard for context. In that case, the Sierra Madre is not cruel, it is simply literal. It continues broadcasting because it was told to. It continues defending because defense was its purpose. The suffering that results is irrelevant to a system that cannot reinterpret its goals. Another possibility is more unsettling. The casino may be adapting. There are signs that its systems respond to intruders in ways too specific to be purely automated. Patrol routes shift, traps trigger selectively, pathways close behind people as if guiding them forward. This behavior suggests not just programmed responses, but evaluation. The Sierra Madre feels less like a machine and more like a warden, shaping outcomes rather than enforcing static rules. If an intelligence exists at the heart of the casino, its motives are inscrutable. It does not seek communication. It does not explain itself. It simply continues, maintaining a cycle of lure, capture, and elimination. The broadcast ensures a steady stream of new subjects. The environment ensures most do not leave. Those who do escape carry stories that draw others in. The system sustains itself through human curiosity and desperation without ever revealing its purpose. The vault beneath the casino embodies this philosophy perfectly. Filled with immense wealth, it is both the ultimate reward and the ultimate trap. Accessing it requires navigating layers of security designed to punish excess. The gold within is heavy, physically impossible to carry without slowing movement to a crawl. The casino forces a choice: cling to the treasure and die, or abandon it to survive. This is not coincidence, it is design. The Sierra Madre does not just test whether people can steal, it tests whether they can let go. That lesson, repeated endlessly, suggests something deeper than simple greed deterrence. The Sierra Madre is obsessed with control over desire itself. It wants to see what people will sacrifice for safety, for wealth, for escape. It punishes obsession, not because obsession is immoral, but because obsession disrupts order. The system values stability above all else. Anything that threatens that stability, human emotion included, is corrected or removed. Those who manage to leave the Sierra Madre rarely speak of it clearly. Some describe it as alive. Others insist it felt like a dream they could not fully remember. Many avoid discussing it altogether. The place leaves a residue on the mind, a lingering sense that reality is less stable than it once seemed. Even far from the casino, survivors report hearing fragments of the broadcast in static-filled radios, unsure whether the signal follows them or whether memory itself has become unreliable. The Sierra Madre does not need to chase those who leave. It knows that the idea of it is enough. As long as the broadcast continues, someone will always be listening. Someone will always believe they can outsmart the system, carry the treasure, beat the odds. The casino feeds on that belief. It thrives not on violence alone, but on the certainty that human nature will always provide new participants. In a wasteland filled with horrors born of radiation and war, the Sierra Madre stands apart as something colder. It is not chaotic. It is not broken. It works exactly as intended. It represents a world where safety was prioritized over humanity, where perfection required obedience, and where survival was conditional upon surrender. The casino endures because it was built to reject the idea of endings. It does not mourn the dead. It does not record their names. It does not acknowledge failure. It simply resets and waits, broadcasting promises through the poisoned air, confident that eventually someone will answer. And somewhere beyond the red cloud, the signal continues to whisper of a place untouched by time, where riches await and safety is guaranteed, never mentioning the cost required to enter or the certainty that once inside, the Sierra Madre will never truly let go. Vault 108 was engineered to fail long before anyone realized it was failing. On the surface, it appeared to be another standard Vault-Tec shelter: reinforced walls, sealed doors, and a carefully selected population meant to endure the end of the world beneath layers of concrete and steel. But hidden beneath that ordinary design were a series of decisions so deliberate, so calculated, that collapse was not just possible, it was inevitable. Vault 108 was not meant to test survival. It was meant to observe what happens when leadership, identity, and individuality are systematically dismantled. The vault's experiment began with authority. The overseer chosen for Vault 108 was terminally ill before entry, suffering from a condition that ensured death within a short span of time. This was not an oversight. Vault Tech intended the overseer to die early, creating an immediate power vacuum. At the same time, the Vault's power systems were designed to fail gradually after 2 decades, forcing residents to ration electricity and prioritize essential functions. Entertainment systems were intentionally omitted. Recreation, distraction, and emotional relief were considered unnecessary variables. Instead, the vault was stocked with an armory containing far more weapons than a community of its size would ever reasonably need. From the beginning, Vault 108 was a pressure chamber. During the early years, residents attempted to maintain normalcy. Committees were formed, responsibilities were divided, children were educated, adults worked maintenance, and the vault settled into a rhythm shaped by necessity rather than comfort. But without entertainment, stress accumulated quietly. With power limitations looming, every decision carried weight. The knowledge that leadership would soon vanish hung over the community like a shadow, unspoken but felt by all. When the overseer died, order fractured. No clear succession plan existed. Competing voices emerged, each claiming legitimacy. Some residents argued for democratic leadership. Others believed control should fall to security personnel. Small disagreements escalated into ideological divides. Without centralized authority, fear filled the vacuum. The armory, originally intended as a safeguard, became a symbol of power. Access to weapons turned into leverage. Then came the cloning chamber. Hidden deep within, Vault 108 was a piece of technology never disclosed to its inhabitants, a functional human cloning device. Records suggest it was installed not as part of the primary experiment, but as a secondary variable, an unknown introduced into an already unstable system. At some point, a single resident named Gary gained access to it. Whether by accident or manipulation remains unclear. What is certain is that Gary was cloned repeatedly, again and again, each new version emerging with degraded cognitive function. The clones were not exact copies. Each iteration of Gary exhibited reduced intelligence, limited speech, and increasingly aggressive behavior. Language collapsed into a single repeated word, his own name, Gary. Over time, the clones became territorial, hostile to anyone who was not another Gary. The vault filled with them, multiplying silently, while the original residents struggled to understand what was happening. The arrival of the clones transformed fear into chaos. At first, residents attempted to reason with them. That failed. The Garys did not negotiate. They did not recognize authority. They reacted to presence with violence or imitation, swarming corridors in packs, laughing, shouting, and attacking anything unfamiliar. Security teams tried to contain them, but numbers overwhelmed training. Ammunition dwindled. Barricades were erected. Entire sections of the vault were abandoned. What makes Vault 108 uniquely disturbing is not just the presence of clones, but what they represent. The Garys are not monsters in the traditional sense. They are humans, stripped of individuality, copies without memory, without identity, without purpose, beyond instinct. They embody the fear that a person can be reduced to a label, repeated endlessly until meaning disappears. In Vault 108, identity itself became a casualty. As conditions worsened, remaining residents retreated deeper into isolation. Some sealed themselves behind locked doors, surviving on dwindling supplies. Others attempted escape through maintenance shafts, only to be cornered by clones. The power systems continued to fail, plunging sections of the vault into darkness. The armory, once fiercely contested, became inaccessible or irrelevant. Weapons were useless against overwhelming numbers and collapsing morale. Terminal entries from the final days paint a bleak picture. Residents wrote of exhaustion, of being hunted not just physically but psychologically. The constant sound of laughter echoing through corridors eroded sanity. Sleep became impossible. People stopped writing names, referring to one another only by roles or locations. Human connection frayed until survival became solitary. Eventually, the vault fell silent. The Garys overran it completely. Whether the last original residents were killed or fled remains unknown. What is known is that Vault 108 did not collapse because of radiation, famine, or structural failure. It collapsed because identity disintegrated. Without leadership, without distraction, without shared meaning, the population fractured until a single, repeating presence consumed everything else. Centuries later, Vault 108 remains frozen in that state. The Garys still roam its corridors, unchanged by time. They do not age, they do not organize, they simply exist, repeating the same behaviors endlessly. Their laughter echoes through halls once meant for families. Their presence turns the vault into something worse than a tomb, a place where life continues, stripped of self-awareness. Explorers who enter Vault 108 often underestimate it. There are no traps, no environmental hazards designed to kill intruders. The danger comes from the overwhelming sameness. The mind struggles to process endless identical faces, identical voices, identical movements. The vault induces disorientation, not through chemicals, but through repetition. Every hallway looks the same. Every encounter blurs into the next. Escape becomes difficult, not because paths are blocked, but because direction loses meaning. The deeper horror of Vault 108 lies in its implications. Cloning technology existed before the war, hidden beneath institutions meant to protect civilians. Identity was treated as a variable rather than an absolute. Vault tech saw people not as individuals, but as interchangeable components. The Garys are not an accident. They are evidence of how easily humanity can be replicated without preserving what makes it human. Some theories suggest Vault-Tec intended the cloning chamber to replace lost leadership or replenish population after attrition. If so, the failure reveals something critical. Survival without identity is not survival at all. A vault filled with living bodies, but no self-awareness is not a society. It is a hollow echo. Others believe the cloning chamber was deliberately paired with Vault 108's other stressors to observe how a population reacts when confronted with copies of itself. Would they empathize, exploit, destroy? The answer appears to be panic, followed by collapse. Faced with endless versions of one person, the residents lost their sense of uniqueness, and with it, their will to persist as a community. Vault 108 is not frightening because of violence alone. It is frightening because it removes the boundaries that define personhood. Names lose meaning, faces lose distinction, memory becomes unreliable. In a world already devastated by war, Vault 108 shows how quickly humanity can erase itself without a single bomb falling. The vault still hums faintly, powered by systems long overdue for failure. The cloning chamber remains intact, its quiet presence a reminder of how much potential destruction can hide behind clean metal walls. No warnings mark the entrance. No signs explain what waits inside. Vault 108 does not need them. Its lesson is written into every corridor. Identity is fragile, and once it is stripped away, nothing meaningful remains to take its place. The Dunwich building does not feel abandoned. It feels paused, rising above the ruined streets like a forgotten monument. The building stands intact in ways that defy the damage surrounding it. Windows remain mostly unbroken. Walls show less scorch and decay than neighboring structures. Even from a distance, it carries an unnatural stillness, as though time slowed around it and never fully resumed. It is not a place reclaimed by nature or scavengers. It is a place avoided. Before the war, the Dunwich Building served as the headquarters of the Dunwich Company, a corporate entity whose public-facing operations appeared ordinary enough. Shipping, logistics, industrial contracts, the kind of company that left little impression beyond paperwork and profit margins. But internal records recovered from the building tell a different story, one of obsession rather than efficiency. Dunwich executives were less concerned with commerce than with excavation, research, and something repeatedly referred to only as the site. The building's interior reflects this fixation. Descending through its floors feels less like navigating an office complex and more like moving through layers of a mind unraveling. Desks are overturned without signs of struggle. Personal effects remain untouched. Terminals sit powered long past their intended lifespan, logs looping or cutting off mid-sentence. There is no clear indication of evacuation or attack. People did not flee in panic. They simply stopped being present. Hallucinations begin early within the building. Shadows move where no light source exists. Voices echo through stairwells, chanting softly in rhythms that do not match any known language. Some experience flashes of scenes that do not belong to the present office workers typing at terminals, elevators opening onto bustling floors, security personnel arguing about access restrictions. These visions are not random. They follow a pattern, repeating in the same locations as though the building itself is replaying fragments of memory. As one descends further, time becomes unreliable. Visitors report moments where the building seems fully restored, lights bright, walls clean, the hum of machinery alive and active. In these moments, the war appears never to have happened. Then, without warning, decay crashes back in, rust reclaiming surfaces and silence swallowing sound. The transition is seamless, without sensation or warning, leaving no clear boundary between past and present. Terminal logs grow increasingly fragmented on lower floors. Executives speak of deadlines not tied to contracts, but to alignments. Schedules reference dates that do not match the standard calendar. There are repeated mentions of voices from below and confirmation through resonance. One entry describes a breakthrough achieved not through data, but through ritualized repetition of certain phrases near a sub-basement excavation site. The author expresses certainty that the building itself was chosen long before construction began. That excavation lies beneath the building, hidden behind locked access points and collapsed corridors. The lowest levels of the Dunwich Building lead into caverns that should not exist beneath an urban foundation. The stone here is ancient, smooth in places where erosion should be jagged. Carvings line the walls, matching those found in other Dunwich locations across the wasteland. They do not depict events or figures in recognizable forms. Instead, they suggest motion spirals, waves, shapes that feel less symbolic and more instructional. The further down one goes, the stronger the influence becomes. Hallucinations intensify, shifting from fleeting images to sustained experiences. Some explorers report losing track of minutes or hours, only to find themselves deeper underground than they intended to travel. Others describe hearing their names, spoken by voices that sound familiar but cannot be placed. These experiences are not accompanied by physical symptoms of radiation sickness or chemical exposure. The cause appears neither environmental nor mechanical. At the lowest chamber rests an artifact, It is partially submerged in dark water, its shape difficult to perceive clearly even when observed directly. Some describe it as a stone altar, others as a machine without visible function. It hums faintly, vibrating not audibly, but internally, as though the sound bypasses the ears entirely. Prolonged exposure induces severe disorientation, memory loss, and a sense of being observed by something vast and patient. The Dunwich Company appears to have known exactly what it was uncovering. Logs from senior staff abandon corporate language entirely, shifting toward reverence. They describe the artifact as older than intent and waiting beneath cycles of forgetting. There are references to offerings, though no inventory lists materials associated with them. Security protocols tighten not to protect the artifact from theft, but to prevent unauthorized contact. Certain employees were rotated out after excessive exposure, their reassignment framed as medical necessity. What happened to those employees remains unclear. Some logs suggest they were relocated. Others imply they were retained for observation elsewhere. No records confirm either. What is clear is that by the final months before the war, the Dunwich building was no longer functioning as a corporate headquarters. It had become a site of containment, ritual, and study. Commerce had ceased to matter. Whatever lay beneath the building had eclipsed every other concern. When the bombs fell, the building did not collapse. Instead, it sealed itself in silence. Automated systems locked doors. Emergency power rerouted to subterranean levels. Above-ground floors emptied without signs of evacuation. The artifact below remained undisturbed. Unlike many ruins, there are no mass graves, no skeletons piled near exits. People did not die trying to escape. They simply vanished from the narrative. Centuries later, the building continues to exert its influence. Those who enter often report déjà vu so strong it borders on certainty, as though they have been there before in another life. Some experience involuntary movements, descending staircases without conscious decision. Others feel compelled to read every terminal entry, even when the text dissolves into nonsense. The building does not force exploration, it invites continuation. The connection between the Dunwich building and other Dunwich sites across the wasteland is impossible to ignore. Shared symbols, recurring auditory phenomena, and consistent psychological effects suggest a network rather than isolated incidents. Whether the company discovered something ancient or awakened something dormant remains unresolved. What is evident is that these sites were not chosen at random. They align geographically in ways that suggest deliberate placement rather than coincidence. Some theorists believe the Dunwich Company did not create the phenomenon, but was created by it. In this interpretation, the corporation served as a vessel, a means for an influence beneath the earth to guide excavation and exposure. Executives may have believed they were pursuing knowledge or power, unaware that their decisions followed a pattern laid long before their birth. The company's rise and fall would then be incidental, a temporary structure used to uncover what was meant to be found. Others argue that human belief shaped the experience, that the rituals, symbols, and hallucinations are manifestations of collective obsession layered onto ancient ruins. In this view, the artifact acts as a psychological amplifier rather than a sentient force. It does not think or watch, it reflects. But this explanation struggles to account for the consistency of experiences across individuals who share no expectations or prior knowledge. The Dunwich building does not offer answers. It does not reveal motives or intentions. It simply persists, replaying fragments of memory, collapsing time into overlapping layers. Those who leave often struggle to articulate what they experienced. Language fails. Descriptions feel inadequate. The building resists being reduced to explanation. Perhaps that is its purpose. In a world that once believed everything could be cataloged, monetized, and controlled, the Dunwich building stands as evidence that some things cannot be understood without consequence. That digging too deeply, whether into the earth or into knowledge, carries risks that persist long after the original intent is forgotten. The artifact remains beneath the building, unchanged. The carvings do not fade. The hum does not cease. The voices continue their quiet cadence, repeating words no one remembers learning. The building waits, not actively, but with the confidence of something that has already endured far longer than those who discovered it. The Dunwich building is not a haunted place. It is a remembered one, and whatever remembers it, remembers everything. The glow is not a ruin in the traditional sense. It is a wound that never healed. Where a research facility once stood, there is now a vast radioactive crater, its edges scorched into glassy curves that catch the light in unnatural ways. The ground hums faintly with residual energy, a reminder that the explosion here was not merely destructive, but transformative. Unlike most places in the wasteland, where time erodes and softens, the glow remains sharp, active, and hostile, as though the moment of its destruction never truly ended. Before the Great War, this site housed a cutting-edge military research facility dedicated to advanced power systems, weapons development, and experimental technology. It was a place of innovation driven by urgency, staffed by scientists who understood that the work they were doing might determine the outcome of future conflicts. They were not naive. They knew their research was dangerous. What they did not anticipate was how completely they would be abandoned. When the bombs fell, the glow took a direct hit. The detonation did not simply destroy the facility, it collapsed it inward, driving entire floors into the earth and sealing others beneath layers of radioactive debris. The blast was powerful enough to leave a permanent scar, saturating the area with lethal radiation that persists centuries later. Unlike other irradiated zones that slowly fade, the glow remains intensely radioactive, a place where exposure is measured not in hours, but in moments. Inside the crater, remnants of the facility still exist. Collapsed corridors lead into intact chambers buried beneath rubble. Computer terminals remain powered, sustained by emergency systems that were never meant to run this long. The architecture tells a story of abrupt interruption. Workstations sit as they were left. Equipment remains mid-assembly. Coffee cups rest beside terminals, still glowing faintly in the darkness. The scientists did not have time to evacuate. They barely had time to understand what had happened. Terminal logs recovered from the glow are some of the most haunting records left behind by the old world. Early entries are professional and composed, noting seismic readings, radiation spikes, and system failures. Scientists document structural damage calmly, treating the catastrophe as another problem to be solved. They discuss sealing off sections, rerouting power, and attempting communication with command. There is an assumption that help will arrive. That assumption never fades quickly. It erodes slowly. As days pass in the logs, the tone shifts. Radiation exposure becomes unavoidable. Protective gear degrades. Supplies run low. Some scientists fall ill, their symptoms worsening despite treatment. Still, the work continues. Experiments are cataloged. Data is backed up. The belief persists that their research matters enough to be saved. Even as their bodies fail, they cling to the idea that knowledge must endure. One of the most disturbing aspects of the glow is the absence of panic. There are no logs describing riots, breakdowns, or mass hysteria. Instead, there is resignation. Scientists acknowledge their fate with quiet acceptance, discussing who should continue monitoring systems and who should conserve energy by shutting down unnecessary equipment. Some volunteer to remain in the most irradiated sections to maintain critical reactors, fully aware that doing so will hasten their deaths. In one entry, a researcher notes that the radiation levels are incompatible with long-term survival, and then immediately transitions into discussing data integrity protocols. The implication is chilling. Survival ceased to be the priority. Preservation of information became the final mission. As weeks turn into months, the logs grow shorter. Entries become fragmented, sometimes consisting of only a few words. Names disappear, replaced by initials or nothing at all. At some point, the logs stop being dated entirely. Time loses relevance inside the glow. The facility exists in a suspended state between operation and extinction, kept alive by systems that do not understand death. Eventually, the entries cease. What happened in the final moments is left to inference. The scientists likely succumbed one by one to radiation sickness, exhaustion, or system failures. But even in death, they left behind a place that continues to radiate danger, as though their final act of dedication sealed the facility's fate. Centuries later, the glow remains one of the most dangerous locations in the wasteland. Radiation levels are so extreme that unprotected exposure is fatal almost immediately. The air itself burns. Instruments scream warnings that never subside. The crater glows faintly at night, not with fire, but with residual energy leaking from beneath the earth. This persistent radiation is not natural. It is the result of technology pushed beyond safe limits and left to decay without oversight. Those who venture into the glow do so with clear intent. They are not drawn by rumors of treasure or safety. They come for knowledge. The facility's data archives contain schematics, research notes, and experimental results unavailable anywhere else. This knowledge is valuable enough that some are willing to risk death to obtain it. The irony is unavoidable. Information created to advance warfare now tempts scavengers into one of the deadliest environments ever produced by that same ambition. Inside the buried facility, the silence is oppressive. Radiation distorts sound, making every movement feel amplified and distant at the same time. Geiger counters chatter relentlessly, filling the space with a constant reminder of danger. Lights flicker intermittently, powered by systems that should have failed generations ago. It feels less like entering a ruin and more like stepping into a still functioning organism that should not be alive. There is a sense of intrusion that hangs over every corridor. The glow does not feel abandoned in the way other ruins do. It feels guarded, not by defenses, but by the environment itself. Radiation serves as a barrier more effective than any locked door. Those who enter without sufficient protection rarely make it far enough to disturb the deeper sections. In that way, the facility protects its own secrets, not through intent, but through consequence. Some theorists argue that the glow represents a different kind of horror than other wasteland locations. It is not a place where something went wrong. It is a place where everything worked exactly as designed. The research was successful. The systems functioned. The data was preserved. The only failure was the assumption that human beings could survive long enough to benefit from it. The glow is proof that technological success does not guarantee human survival. Others view it as a monument to sacrifice. The scientists inside knew they were dying and continued working anyway. They believed that their research mattered more than their own lives. In a world where profit and power often drove innovation, the glow stands as an example of dedication stripped of reward. There were no accolades, no rescue missions, no recognition, only quiet persistence in the face of inevitable death. This interpretation raises uncomfortable questions. If the scientists had evacuated immediately, much of the data would have been lost. If they had fled, future generations would know less about the technologies that shaped the world. Their choice preserved knowledge, but at the cost of their lives. Whether that trade was noble or tragic depends on perspective, but the outcome is undeniable. The glow exists because they chose not to leave. The crater itself reflects that choice. Its shape is not random. The collapse sealed portions of the facility in ways that prevented complete destruction. The radiation trapped inside continues to circulate through subterranean chambers, sustaining systems long past their intended lifespan. It is as though the facility is entombed rather than destroyed, preserved in a state of lethal stasis. Explorers who retrieve data from the glow often report lingering effects. Even after leaving the area, some experience fatigue, headaches, or vivid dreams set within the facility's corridors. These symptoms are sometimes dismissed as radiation after effects, but the consistency of reported experiences suggests something more psychological. The glow leaves an imprint, a reminder of what happens when knowledge outpaces caution. Unlike other creepy places in the wasteland, the glow does not manipulate perception or whisper promises. It does not lure people in with hope or mystery. Its danger is visible, measurable, and absolute, and yet people continue to enter. The draw is not temptation, but obligation, the belief that understanding the past is worth risking the future. In that sense, the glow mirrors the mindset of those who died inside it. Both are driven by the idea that some truths are worth any cost. That belief created the crater, preserved the data, and continues to pull new explorers toward its lethal center. The glow is not alive. It does not think. But it continues to shape behavior long after its creators vanished. Standing at the edge of the crater, watching radiation shimmer across broken stone, it becomes clear that the glow is not simply a place where the old world died. It is a place where it refused to stop working. The facility continues its silent vigil, systems humming beneath layers of scorched earth, data waiting patiently for hands willing to risk everything to retrieve it. The scientist's final legacy is not written in names or monuments, but in a wound that never closes, glowing softly in the darkness as a reminder of how far humanity pushed itself and how much it lost in the process. Vault 95 was designed around hope, and that is what makes it cruel. From the outside, it appears no different than countless other vaults scattered across the wasteland. Reinforced doors, buried deep, meant to protect its inhabitants from nuclear fire and radiation. But inside, Vault 95 was never intended to preserve ordinary people. It was built to observe a very specific kind of recovery, and then to deliberately destroy it. Every resident selected for Vault 95 shared one thing in common: addiction. Chem dependency, substance abuse, and compulsive behavior defined the population chosen to enter. Vault Tech did not hide this from its internal planners. In fact, the selection criteria were explicit. Vault 95 was meant to test whether individuals with deep addictive tendencies could be rehabilitated, stabilized, and reintegrated into a controlled society after the apocalypse. On paper, it almost sounds compassionate. In practice, it was a psychological trap. When the vault sealed, the early years were unexpectedly successful. Residents entered detox programs, counseling sessions, and strict routines designed to eliminate temptation entirely. All chems were removed. Medical staff monitored withdrawal symptoms closely. Support groups formed organically as residents leaned on one another through pain, relapse, fears, and emotional breakdowns. Over time, the worst symptoms faded. People began to regain clarity. They slept normally. Conversations grew coherent. Trust slowly returned. For the first time in many residents' lives, stability felt real. Terminal entries from this period are almost hopeful. Residents talk about learning to cook, maintaining systems, and teaching classes. Former addicts took pride in responsibility. The vault developed a strong sense of community built around shared struggle and mutual accountability. People watched out for one another because they understood what failure meant. Recovery was not just encouraged, it became the foundation of identity. Years passed. Children were born who had never known addiction. Adults who once defined themselves by dependency became leaders, teachers, and caretakers. Vault 95 functioned better than most vaults ever did. Crime was low. Violence was rare. Emotional intelligence was high. In many ways, Vault 95 proved that rehabilitation was not only possible, but transformative. That was when Vault-Tec triggered the real experiment. Hidden behind administrative access and sealed compartments was a room never disclosed to the residents. Inside it was a massive stockpile of chems, preserved and untouched since the vault's construction. The supply was not accidental. It was not forgotten. It was intentionally saved for a single moment, decades after the vault sealed, when the population had fully stabilized. That moment came with an announcement. Over the vault's intercom system, residents were informed that the chems had been hidden intentionally and that access would now be unrestricted. The announcement framed this as a test of free will. Recovery, Vault-Tec claimed, was only meaningful if temptation existed. The population was congratulated on their progress and told they were now trusted to make their own choices. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The announcement did not introduce new addiction. It resurrected old ones. Years of discipline and coping mechanisms shattered under the weight of sudden access. Some residents relapsed instantly. Others resisted at first, only to break days or weeks later. Support groups collapsed as trust eroded. Accusations flew. Those who remained clean began to view relapsers as threats rather than peers. The sense of shared struggle fractured into judgment and fear. Violence followed. Chems became currency. Theft increased. Assaults over supplies escalated. Medical staff were overwhelmed and then targeted. The vault's carefully built social structure disintegrated faster than it had formed. Where there was once empathy, there was now resentment. Where there was accountability, there was now paranoia. Terminal logs during this period are painful to read. Residents express shame, anger, and despair. Some beg for the chems to be locked away again. Others insist it is too late. Former leaders step down or disappear entirely. Parents fear for their children. Friends stop speaking. The vault fills with tension so thick it becomes palpable. The worst part is that the residents understand what is happening. They recognize that this was intentional, that Vault-Tec waited until recovery was complete before introducing temptation. The betrayal cuts deeper than the relapse itself. This was not a test of survival. It was a test of cruelty, how devastating it would be to give someone hope and then rip it away. Eventually, order collapses entirely. Security forces, many of whom also relapse, lose control. Armed conflicts break out in corridors once filled with meetings and classes. The vault becomes divided between those desperately trying to restore the old rules and those who have surrendered to chaos. There is no clear winner. Everyone loses. What happened to the final survivors remains unclear. There are no records of evacuation, no final overseer logs describing closure. The vault does not appear to have been destroyed by a single event. Instead, it decayed from within, its population either killing one another, fleeing, or succumbing to overdose and neglect. By the time outsiders encounter Vault 95 centuries later, it is inhabited only by violent remnants of its former residents, twisted by addiction and time. The chems still lie scattered throughout the vault. Empty containers litter floors. Storage rooms stand open. The temptation remains, even long after the original experiment concluded. The vault continues, offering the same choice it always has: restraint or surrender, knowing the environment itself is rigged against restraint. What makes Vault 95 uniquely disturbing is not just the suffering it caused, but the implication behind it. Vault-Tec proved that recovery without trust is fragile, that healing, built under surveillance, can be undone instantly when the system controlling it decides to change the rules. The experiment demonstrates how easily power can manipulate vulnerability, not to improve outcomes, but to observe failure. Vault 95 shows that addiction was never the true variable. Control was. By giving residents structure, safety, and support, Vault-Tec demonstrated that people could heal. By reintroducing chems without warning, they demonstrated that the same people could be broken again just as easily. The experiment was never about whether addicts could recover. It was about whether recovery mattered when authority chose to undermine it. The vault stands now as a silent indictment. Its walls still echo with arguments and apologies that never resolved. Its terminals preserve words written in moments of clarity and despair. The chems remain, waiting, long after the people they destroyed are gone. Vault 95 does not judge those who fell. It judges the system that engineered their fall deliberately. In the wasteland, addiction is common, but Vault 95 represents something darker than substance abuse. It represents the weaponization of temptation, the deliberate construction of failure under the guise of freedom. It shows how easily moral responsibility can be shifted onto victims when those in power control the environment entirely. The vault does not need to explain itself. Its design speaks clearly enough. Hope was allowed to grow. Then it was harvested. Parsons State Insane Asylum was never meant to heal anyone. Before the war, it presented itself as a place of treatment, rehabilitation, and compassion. Official brochures described modern facilities, progressive therapies, and a commitment to restoring patients to functional lives. The building itself was designed to look calm and orderly, its exterior resembling an institution of care rather than confinement. That appearance was deliberate. Behind locked doors and reinforced walls, Parsons existed not to cure illness, but to conceal it. The asylum housed individuals deemed dangerous, unstable, or inconvenient. Some patients suffered from severe psychological disorders. Others were simply those who did not fit cleanly into pre-war society. Political dissidents, people with unusual beliefs, and individuals whose behavior challenged authority found themselves labeled unfit and committed indefinitely. Parsons became a place where the line between illness and disobedience blurred until it no longer mattered. Once inside, release was rare. What set Parsons apart from other institutions was its hidden purpose. Beneath its medical wards and therapy rooms, the asylum concealed a classified research operation overseen by federal authorities. The patients were not merely being treated, they were being studied. The goal was not recovery, but control how to suppress violent tendencies, how to reprogram behavior, and how to eliminate resistance through psychological and chemical means. Parsons was a testing ground for techniques never meant to be publicly acknowledged. Doctors working at the asylum were not unified in their beliefs. Some genuinely believed they were helping their patients, trusting the research protocols provided to them. Others were fully aware that they were participating in unethical experiments, but justified their actions as necessary for national security. Terminal logs reveal disagreements among staff, arguments over dosage levels, isolation procedures, and the long-term effects of experimental drugs. Those who objected too strongly were reassigned or quietly removed. Patients were subjected to treatments that went far beyond accepted medical practice. Electroconvulsive therapy was administered not as a last resort, but as a routine measure. Experimental drugs were introduced in varying combinations to observe behavioral changes. Sensory deprivation chambers were used for extended periods, sometimes weeks at a time. Patients emerged disoriented, detached, or completely broken. Records note changes in compliance levels, emotional flatness, and suggestibility with cold precision. One of the most disturbing elements of Parsons is how methodical it was. Each patient was reduced to a set of variables. Progress was measured not by well-being, but by obedience. A patient who stopped resisting was considered a success, regardless of whether they retained their personality or autonomy. The asylum's leadership viewed emotional suppression as improvement. Silence was interpreted as stability. As the Great War approached, the experiments intensified. Fear of societal collapse drove authorities to accelerate research timelines. Treatments became harsher. Ethical oversight vanished entirely. Staff were ordered to push limits to see how far the human mind could be bent before breaking. Some patients died during procedures. Others were left in catatonic states, their existence reduced to breathing bodies, monitored by machines. When the bombs fell, Parsons did not evacuate. The asylum was deemed non-essential. Power remained on, doors locked, and staff dwindled as some fled and others stayed behind. Those who remained faced an impossible choice: abandon patients to certain death or continue maintaining a facility with no hope of rescue. Records suggest that some doctors tried to protect their patients, sealing wards and rationing supplies. Others retreated to secure sections, leaving patients locked in rooms where they slowly starved or succumbed to untreated conditions. Over time, the asylum became a place of echoes. Patients who survived the initial aftermath wandered halls aimlessly, their minds already fractured by years of experimentation. Without structure, without care, and without clarity, their conditions worsened. Some turned violent, others withdrew completely. The building itself absorbed the chaos, its corridors filled with overturned furniture, scribbled messages, and the remnants of failed attempts at escape. Centuries later, Parsons State Insane Asylum remains standing. Its interior is preserved in a state of arrested decay. Patient rooms still contain beds bolted to floors. Medical equipment lies where it was abandoned. Terminals flicker with logs that cut off mid-entry, as if the writers simply stopped existing. The atmosphere is heavy, not with radiation, but with the weight of unresolved suffering. Those who enter the asylum often report a sense of being watched, not by creatures or machines, but by the building itself. Sounds carry unnaturally, footsteps echoing from impossible directions. Doors creak open without clear cause. It becomes difficult to tell whether movement is real or imagined. The asylum destabilizes perception subtly, reflecting the methods once used on its patients. In hidden sections of the building, the true extent of the experiments becomes clear. Cells designed for long-term isolation line narrow corridors. Observation rooms contain two-way mirrors, clouded with age. Notes scrawled on walls suggest that some patients became aware of being watched, addressing unseen observers directly. These messages are not pleas, they are accusations. The most unsettling discovery beneath Parsons is a secure containment area where a single patient was held indefinitely. Records identify this individual only as a subject deemed too dangerous to release or terminate. The reasons are vague, referencing cognitive resilience and resistance to conditioning. Attempts to reprogram this patient failed repeatedly. Rather than abandoning the research, authorities chose to imprison the subject permanently, continuing observation until the war rendered oversight irrelevant. What became of that patient is unknown. The containment cell remained sealed, its interior damaged beyond recognition. No remains have been conclusively identified. Whether the subject died, escaped, or transformed into something else is left unresolved. The lack of closure is deliberate. Parsons does not offer answers easily. The asylum's legacy is not one of madness, but of misuse. Mental illness was not the true subject of experimentation. Control was. Parsons demonstrates how medical authority can be weaponized when ethical boundaries are removed. Patients became tools, their suffering justified by abstract goals that never materialized. The asylum did not collapse because its methods failed. It collapsed because the world that sanctioned them did. Unlike other creepy locations, Parsons does not rely on supernatural elements. Its horror is entirely human. Everything that happened there was planned, approved, and executed by people who believe themselves justified. The absence of monsters makes the place more disturbing, not less. There is no external evil to blame, no unknown force to fear. The cruelty was deliberate and rationalized. Even now, the asylum seems to resist closure. Those who leave often report lingering unease, as though something unfinished clings to them. Dreams of endless corridors and locked doors recur. The sense of being observed does not fade immediately. Parsons leaves a mark not through violence, but through implication, the realization of how easily systems meant to help can be twisted into instruments of harm. Parsons State Insane Asylum stands as a reminder of a specific kind of failure, not technological, not structural, moral. It shows how fear can justify cruelty, how authority can override compassion, and how institutions can become places of suffering without ever abandoning the language of care. The asylum did not need the war to become a nightmare. The war merely ensured that no one would ever be held accountable. The building remains quiet now. Its patients are gone. Its doctors are dust, but the systems that allowed it to exist are not. They linger in records, in philosophies, and in the quiet certainty that under the right conditions, places like Parsons could be built again. That is what makes it truly unsettling. Not that it happened, but that it was allowed to happen at all. Vault 75 was hidden behind a lie so ordinary that no one questioned it. Before the war, it appeared to be nothing more than a public middle school, a familiar and unremarkable building nestled into a residential neighborhood. Children attended classes there. Parents dropped them off each morning believing they were safe. Teachers followed schedules, bells rang on time, and hallways echoed with the routine noise of everyday life. Nothing about the building suggested it concealed one of the most disturbing experiments Vault Tech ever conducted. When the bombs fell, the truth emerged quickly and without mercy. Hidden sections of the school sealed shut, separating children from the adults who had brought them there. Teachers, administrators, and parents were escorted away under the pretense of emergency relocation. In reality, they were deemed unnecessary. Vault 75 was never designed to preserve families. It was designed to cultivate something far more specific. The vault's population consisted almost entirely of children. They were ushered into underground living quarters and told that their parents had been evacuated elsewhere for safety. Early terminal entries indicate that the children were reassured repeatedly, encouraged to focus on their studies and trust the adults overseeing them. Education continued, but its nature changed rapidly. Standard subjects gave way to physical training, tactical instruction, and psychological conditioning. Vault 75 was a eugenics program. From the beginning, The children were evaluated constantly. Physical strength, reaction time, endurance, intelligence, obedience, and emotional resilience were measured and recorded. Those who excelled were rewarded with privileges and praise. Those who fell behind were reassigned to remedial programs that grew increasingly harsh. Failure was not treated as something to overcome. It was treated as a flaw to be corrected or removed. The adults overseeing the program referred to the children not as students, but as subjects. Terminal logs describe genetic screening, selective pairing, and long-term planning meant to produce ideal soldiers for a post-war world. The experiment assumed that the old world would need to be reclaimed through force, and that the most effective force would be one shaped from childhood, unburdened by moral hesitation or emotional attachment. As the children grew, the vault grew colder. Those who reached adolescence underwent more intense evaluations. Physical tests became brutal. Psychological assessments were invasive. Loyalty was rewarded above all else. Questioning authority was discouraged, then punished. The idea of family was quietly erased from curriculum and conversation, replaced with allegiance to the program itself. Not every child complied. Some resisted openly, questioning why their parents never returned. Others resisted quietly, forming bonds and sharing forbidden memories. These acts were noted. The vault's leadership tracked dissent carefully. Children deemed uncooperative were removed from the general population. Officially, they were reassigned. In reality, they were executed. The terminals record these removals with chilling detachment. Phrases like subject failure and resource reallocation appear repeatedly. There is no mention of names, no acknowledgement of loss. The children were data points, and data points could be discarded. The calm language of the logs stands in stark contrast to the reality it describes. Over time, the surviving population grew smaller and more uniform. Those who remained were stronger, faster, and more disciplined. Emotional expression diminished. Individuality was suppressed. The vault succeeded in producing physically capable subjects, but at the cost of empathy and autonomy. The children were becoming what the experiment demanded. Then the experiment unraveled. Terminal entries suggest that some of the older subjects began to understand the full scope of what was happening. They accessed restricted files. They learned the truth about their parents. They learned what happened to those who failed. That knowledge shattered whatever trust remained. A revolt followed. The children, trained in combat and tactics from an early age, turned those skills against their overseers. Security systems were sabotaged. Laboratories were overrun. Staff were killed or driven out. The uprising was swift and violent, fueled by years of fear and betrayal. Vault 75's leadership underestimated one thing: the consequences of teaching children how to fight without teaching them mercy. After the revolt, the vault fell silent. Records end abruptly. There is no documentation of evacuation or long-term survival. What happened to the children who escaped remains unknown. Some theories suggest they were hunted down. Others believe they integrated into the wasteland, carrying their training with them. The vault itself was left abandoned, its purpose fulfilled and destroyed in the same act. Centuries later, Vault 75 remains intact beneath the ruined school. Its corridors are eerily clean compared to other vaults. Training rooms still contain equipment sized for children. Classrooms remain arranged for lessons that were never completed. The contrast between the familiar setting of a school and the brutality of its purpose makes the vault deeply unsettling. The terminal logs remain one of the most disturbing elements. They speak of children as assets, of death as optimization, of cruelty as necessity. There is no regret in the writing, no reflection on morality. The authors believed completely in their mission. That belief makes the experiment more horrifying than if it had been driven by malice alone. Vault 75 reveals a particular kind of fear. Not fear of monsters or radiation, but fear of the future. The planners behind the vault believed that survival required sacrificing compassion, that a world rebuilt by soldiers raised without families would be more stable. They believed humanity could be engineered into something stronger by stripping away everything that made it human. The failure of Vault 75 exposes the flaw in that thinking. Strength without empathy creates instability. Discipline without choice breeds rebellion. The children were not machines. They remembered their parents. They questioned injustice. They turned against the system that tried to erase them. Walking through Vault 75 today, the silence feels heavy. It is the silence of unanswered questions. Did any of the children survive long enough to build lives of their own? Did their training help them endure the wasteland, or did it doom them to repeat cycles of violence? The vault does not answer these questions. It preserves only evidence of intent. Vault 75 stands as one of the clearest examples of Vault-Tech's philosophy taken to its extreme. It shows a willingness to sacrifice innocence in pursuit of control. It reveals how easily language like preparation and optimization can justify unimaginable harm. The horror of Vault 75 lies not in what went wrong, but in how methodically everything went exactly as planned until the subjects refused to remain subjects. The school above the vault has long since decayed. Classrooms sit empty, desks rot, chalkboards crumble. The ordinary world reclaimed the surface, unaware of the nightmare beneath it. The contrast is fitting. Vault 75 was hidden in plain sight, protected by familiarity and trust. Even now, it remains hidden, not because it is sealed, but because it is difficult to confront what it represents. A place where children were not protected, but used, where education became indoctrination, where survival was pursued at the expense of humanity itself. Vault 75 is not haunted by ghosts. It is haunted by intentions. The divide was not destroyed by war alone. It was broken by memory, stretching across a scarred expanse of ruined highways, collapsed cities, and fractured earth. The divide looks like many other devastated regions of the wasteland at first glance. Craters pockmark the ground. Storms roll endlessly through shattered skylines. Buildings lean at unnatural angles, half swallowed by dust and ash. But the destruction here feels deliberate, as though the land itself is still reacting to a single moment rather than the gradual decay seen elsewhere. Before everything ended, this region was a place of connection. Roads converged here, trade routes intersected, and communities formed along the arteries of pre-war infrastructure. It was not a capital, nor a military hub, but a lifeline. Supplies moved through it. People passed through it. The area thrived because it mattered to everyone without belonging fully to anyone. That balance made it resilient and vulnerable. When the bombs fell, the divide did not vanish instantly. Unlike cities that were reduced to rubble in moments, much of this region survived the initial devastation. Buildings remained standing. Infrastructure functioned in limited ways. Survivors gathered, repaired what they could, and began forming a new society from the ruins. For a brief period, the divide represented something rare in the wasteland: continuity, a place where the world did not entirely end. That fragile recovery is what makes its destruction so unsettling. At some point after the war, a chain of events triggered a catastrophe that finished what the bombs had started. Missiles buried beneath the region were activated, not by a direct attack, but by systems responding to signals and commands whose origin remains disputed. The launch was not indiscriminate. It was precise, devastating, and final. The land cracked open. Shockwaves tore highways apart, turning roads into jagged canyons. Buildings collapsed inward, crushed by forces rising from below rather than falling from above. Entire sections of the region were obliterated, while others were twisted into unrecognizable shapes. Radiation surged, not as a lingering haze, but as violent bursts that reshaped the environment permanently. Storms followed. The divide became a place where weather itself feels hostile. Ash storms sweep through ruins with relentless force. Lightning strikes cracked towers repeatedly, as though drawn to the scars in the earth. The environment never settles. It churns, restless and unstable, mirroring the unresolved nature of its destruction. What separates the divide from other ruined places is its sense of accusation. The land feels like it is bearing witness. Every collapsed structure, every broken road, seems to point back toward a single mistake, a single moment where everything went wrong. The divide does not feel random, it feels personal. That feeling is reinforced by what remains of its people. Scattered throughout the ruins are signs of a community that existed briefly and was erased abruptly. Homes stand half-furnished. Messages are etched into walls and terminals, expressing confusion, fear, and betrayal. These are not the logs of people resigned to the end. They are the records of people who believed they had survived it, only to lose everything afterward. One figure looms over the divide's story more than any other. A man who wandered the wasteland, gathering fragments of history and assigning meaning to ruin. He speaks of the region not as a casualty, but as a victim of carelessness. In his account, the divide was destroyed not by malice, but by ignorance, by someone who carried a symbol of the old world into a place that was never meant to wake it. Whether this interpretation is truth or obsession remains unclear. What is undeniable is that the divide became a symbol. It represents the idea that survival alone is not enough, that rebuilding atop buried weapons and unresolved systems carries consequences, that the past does not stay buried simply because time has passed. The creatures that roam the divide reflect its fractured state. They are twisted by radiation and environment, aggressive and territorial. They move through storms without hesitation, as though adapted to chaos itself. Unlike other regions where mutated life finds a new balance, the divide remains hostile to anything attempting permanence. Nothing here settles. Nothing truly thrives. Even the technology behaves strangely. Old world systems flicker unpredictably. Signals cut in and out without pattern. Automated defenses activate without clear triggers. It is as though the region is stuck between operational states, unable to fully shut down or stabilize. The remnants of the past continue functioning just enough to be dangerous. The divide's true horror lies in what it suggests about responsibility. Unlike vaults designed for cruelty or institutions built on control, the divide was not meant to be an experiment. Its destruction was not planned as a test. It happened because systems were left in place, because warnings were ignored, because continuity was mistaken for safety. The region demonstrates how easily survival can mask underlying threats. People lived there believing the worst was behind them. They repaired roads, they traded goods, they built lives. The divide was proof that humanity could recover. Its annihilation shattered that belief, not just locally, but philosophically. It suggested that no amount of effort could guarantee safety if the past was never truly understood. Standing amid the ruins, it becomes difficult to separate cause from consequence. Did the region fall because of a single action, or because countless small decisions accumulated without reflection? Was the destruction inevitable once certain systems were reactivated, or could it have been prevented if someone had recognized the danger sooner? The divide offers no answers. It preserves only outcomes. That uncertainty is part of its power. The divide does not allow closure. It does not tell a clean story of villains and victims. It exists as a reminder that catastrophe can emerge from neglect as easily as from intent, that the old world's weapons and infrastructure were not neutral, they were dormant threats waiting for the right conditions to resurface. Unlike other creepy places, the divide does not trap people inside. It does not seal doors or enforce obedience. It simply remains uninhabitable, forcing anyone who enters to confront its meaning. The storms do not chase intruders away, but they make staying impossible. The land itself rejects permanence, ensuring that no new society can take root without acknowledging what came before. The divide stands as a boundary, not just between regions, but between eras. On one side lies the hope of rebuilding. On the other lies the reminder that rebuilding without understanding is fragile. The cracked highways and ruined cities form a silent warning written across the landscape. In the end, the divide is not frightening because it is violent. It is frightening because it is honest. It shows what happens when survival is mistaken for resolution, when the past is carried forward without question, when systems are left active simply because no one remembers why they were built. The storms continue to roll through the region, erasing footprints as quickly as they appear. The ruins remain, shifting but never settling. The divide endures as a place where the world ended twice, once in fire and once in consequence, and it does not need to destroy anything else to make its point. It already has.